Unfortunately, Akira Omaki couldn't make it here today, so I'm Chizuru and I'm presenting the material. This talk attempts to consider when exactly English resumptive pronouns show island repair effects. Traditionally, since Roth, it has been assumed that resumptive pronouns ameliorate island violations as shown in 2. So it's Roth's example. King Kong is a movie which you laugh yourself sick if you see. If there is a trace, this sentence would be bad, but if you say King Kong is a movie which you laugh yourself sick if you see it, this resumptive pronoun makes the sentence better according to Roth's judgment. However, recent acceptability judgment studies such as McDaniel and Coward 1999 revealed that resumptive pronouns actually don't ameliorate island violations of object movement, unlike those of subject movement, as we'll review later. And given that this subject-object asymmetry in English resumptive pronouns, we consider the following questions. First, are subject and object resumptive pronouns of different kinds? And second, why are subject resumptive pronouns more acceptable than object resumptive pronouns in English? Our answer to the first question is presumably no. They are not of different kinds because subject and object resumptive pronouns exhibit the same interpretation, unlike the two types of the resumptive pronouns in Hebrew. And we conclude that it seems that they are both not intrusive pronouns. And unfortunately, we don't have a clear conclusion to the second question, why subject resumptive pronouns are better. But we'd like to report that our new experimental findings suggest that violation of subject island may be involved in subject gap resumption, and that this violation is somehow crucial to the amelioration effect. In section 2, we review the previous studies on the acceptability judgment studies of English subject and object resumptive pronouns. McDaniel and Coward, 1999, compared the following 4 conditions illustrated in 5. So the first is subject trace condition. That's a girl that I wonder when met you. In the subject resumptive pronoun condition, that's a girl that I wonder when she met you. The object trace condition, that's a girl that I wonder when you met. And finally, the object resumptive pronoun condition, that's a girl that I wonder when you met her. And the results showed that in the baseline, the subject trace was worse than the object trace. And amelioration effect was observed with the subject resumptive pronouns. But crucially, the object resumptive pronoun didn't improve the object trace sentence. And based on this result, McDaniel and Coward claim that the subject extraction in 5a violates a representational constraint, and the object extraction in 5b violates a derivational constraint, and they argue that derivational constraints are not repaired by resumption. But they didn't clarify what these constraints are, so we can suppose that a representational constraint is something like the ECP, which only the subject trace would violate inside an island, and the object extraction in 5b just violate the island violation. So what they call a derivational constraint may refer to the island violation itself. However, note that another operation, sleuthing, repairs violation made by subject and object movement equally. So as is well known, especially to this audience, Roth and Marchant, among many others, showed that sleuthing repairs island violations as shown in 9. So for example, John wanted to know when somebody met you, but I don't remember who. John wanted to know when met you is bad, but the sleuth version, but I don't remember who, is good. And crucially, there is no subject and object asymmetry in island repair by sleuthing of this type. So if you make an object extraction example as in 9C, John wanted to know when you met somebody, but I don't remember who. John wanted to know when you met. This is bad, and the sleuthed version ameliorates this violation as shown in 9D. John wanted to know when you met somebody, but I don't remember who is good. So if island violations of subject and object extraction are ameliorated by sleuthing, I want to suggest that islands are not derivational constraints. It can be repaired later, so it's against McDaniel and Cowart's claim. Going to section 2.2. Alexopolo and Keller conducted an acceptability judgment study of sentences such as 11, who does Mary meet the people that will fire, versus who does Mary meet the people that will fire him, which involve object resumptive pronouns. And they found no difference in acceptability between the trace version and the resumptive pronoun version of 11. However, there are some potential problems in the test sentences. First, we'd like to point out that even in a language like Hebrew, where resumptive pronouns can be used without island violations, there is a restriction that resumptive pronouns need antecedent with a restrictive focus, which means that they must be known to the speaker and the hearer. So maybe the WH phrase who is just incompatible with the resumptive pronoun because it doesn't satisfy the restrictive focus condition. And also, the resumptive pronoun him could be confused as a deictic pronoun. So if you consider this him as a deictic pronoun, it means who does Mary meet the people that will fire him? And if this him is someone different from who, this sentence is bad because there is no variable for who. And if the participant understood the sentence this way, it's not testing the resumption. So to avoid these problems, Omaki and Nakao 2010 did some follow-up study. We employed a D-linked WH phrases, such as which hairdresser, and this satisfies the restrictive focus constraint. And we also facilitated the resumptive pronoun interpretation by the gender bias. For example, if you use a WH phrase like which hairdresser, this hairdresser is biased towards female. So the resumptive pronoun her is more easily associated with it. The actual example is in 14. The director remembered which hairdresser the cameraman speculated that the actor had kissed, versus the actor had kissed her. This is no island condition, without and with resumptive pronouns. In C and D are the island condition, without and with resumptive pronouns. The director remembered which hairdresser the cameraman hated the actor that had kissed, versus that had kissed her. And our results are shown in figure 1. Even after the improvement of the sentence, the object resumptive pronoun didn't improve the island violation. So compare the right two columns, the island condition, no resumptive pronouns, and the resumptive pronouns. And if anything, the resumptive pronoun condition was just slightly worse than the trace condition. So we concluded that there is no amelioration effect. And in addition to the above studies, Sprouse 2007 reports the amelioration effect by subject resumptive pronouns. And recently, Stand et al. 2011 reports lack of the amelioration effect by object resumptive pronouns. So it seems that the subject and object asymmetry observed in McDaniel and Coward seems to be very robust. 18 illustrates Browse's examples. He used both delinked and non-delinked examples. And he observed amelioration effect of the subject resumptive pronouns with both delinked and non-delinked average phrases. He reported that the delinked versions are slightly better than the non-delinked cases, but the repair effect with resumption was observed anyway. Table 1 summarizes the result of these acceptability judgment studies on English resumption and island repair. So a lot of people studied either the subject resumption or the object resumption, but the amelioration effect was observed only in the subject cases. Then, what is the source of the subject and object asymmetry? Below, we consider 3 hypotheses. The first hypothesis is maybe there is a lexical difference. So maybe it's the case that the subject resumption involves true resumption and object resumption involves so-called intrusive resumption, and they are different things. And the hypothesis 2, maybe the amelioration effect by the subject resumption is related to something like the ECP. So that's similar to McDaniel and Coward's the representational constraint. But the point is that the subject trace violates something that the object trace doesn't, and it's crucial for the amelioration effect. And hypothesis 3 states that given the stranding analysis of resumptive pronouns, an additional island violation, that is, the subject island, for the subject resumptive pronoun condition, and this may be crucial for the amelioration effect. As we will see, we'll conclude that this last hypothesis, hypothesis 3, seems to be promising. First, we consider the first hypothesis. Maybe there are 2 types of resumptive pronouns, and one is more acceptable than the other. It is well known that Chow and Sells, 1983, claim that English resumptive pronouns are intrusive pronouns and not real pronouns because it resists binding by a QP, as shown in 21. I'd like to meet a linguist that Mary couldn't remember if she had seen him before. It's good, but I'd like to meet every linguist that Mary couldn't remember if she had seen him before. If the relative clause head is a quantifying expression, you can't use a relative clause. You can't use a resumptive pronoun according to Chow and South's judgment. And recently, Sichel claimed that Hebrew had 2 types of resumptive pronouns based on the following data. In Hebrew, resumptive pronouns are obligatory when movement occurred from within a PP or an NP, and in other cases, it's optional. And she observed that optional resumptive pronouns do not allow de dicto readings. Sorry, I kept saying do not allow de re readings, but actually it doesn't allow de dicto readings, so please fix the handout. And optional resumptive pronouns don't allow variable binding, as we will see in 24b. On the other hand, resumptive pronoun within a PP or within an NP is obligatory, and obligatory resumptive pronouns do allow de dicto readings and variable bindings. And yeah, fix this line too. Obligatory resumptive pronouns allow de dicto readings, and the relevant examples are 23C and 24C in the obligatory resumptive pronoun case. So looking at the actual examples, in 23A, Daniel will find the woman he is looking for. This trace is not embedded within a PP or an NP. So it can alternate with an optional resumptive pronoun as shown in 23b. Daniel will find the woman he is looking for her. And this optional resumptive pronoun, however, doesn't allow the de dicto reading. So there is a reading where Danny is looking for a specific woman and Danny will find her. This reading is possible, but if there is no specific woman, but Danny will find just anyone that he would be looking for, this reading is impossible. And in 23c, the resumption is obligatory because it is inside a PP. Danny will find the woman he is dreaming of her. This of her can't alternate with a trace. And in this obligatory resumption case, both the dere and de dicto readings are okay. And 24 shows the variable binding paradigm. 24a, the picture of himself that everyone likes the most got lost. In this example, the picture of himself is bound by everyone, and the resumptive pronoun is bound by the picture noun, so the bound variable reading is intended for this trace. And in this case, you can't replace it with an optional resumptive pronoun as shown in 24b. The picture of himself that everyone likes it the most got lost. This it cannot get the bound variable interpretation. But if the resumptive pronoun is inside a PP, as shown in 24c, the picture of himself that everyone decided on it got lost. This on it is the obligatory resumptive pronoun, and it can be a bound variable. Sorry, another typo. 24b is bad, so put a star mark on it. But 24c is okay, which is a crucial difference. So our hypothesis 1 assumes that the English subject resumptive pronouns are real resumptive pronouns, while object resumptive pronouns are intrusive resumptive pronouns, as in Chow and Sell's claim. And similarly to Hebrew, real resumptive pronouns are obligatory, and the intrusive ones are optional. So the obligatory ones improve the sentences, but the optional ones are optional in that it can be used, but it doesn't have any amelioration effect. So yeah, that was our first guess. And to test this possibility, we consulted 5 native speakers of English to examine whether English subject and object resumptive pronouns show an interpretive asymmetry with respect to the de dicto reading and bound variable reading. And note that the 5 native speakers all report the acceptability asymmetry between the subject and the object resumptive pronouns. So they all said subject resumptive pronouns have the repair effect, unlike the object resumptive pronouns. So compare the actual example, 27a. You found a woman that John would be happy if he could marry her. This is an object resumptive pronoun, and it is already bad compared to the subject resumptive pronouns. But to the extent that this sentence is acceptable, they allowed both dere and de dicto reading. And 27b, you found a woman that John would be happy if she married him. And this is a subject resumptive pronoun, and they allowed both dere and de dicto readings for this one too. And 28a and b shows the bound variable reading of these resumptive pronouns. So from 28 through 30, the A examples are the object resumptive pronoun examples. So 28a, every woman that John will be happy if he would marry her is ugly. So these examples are not so good, but the acceptability didn't change just because we used the quantified phrase. such as every or no or which of the linguists. So they still said 28A is not so good, but not less good compared to the woman that John will be happy if he would marry her is ugly. So changing it into a quantified phrase doesn't make the sentence totally unacceptable. And same for 28B. Every woman that John will be happy if she would marry him is ugly. This is a subject resumptive pronoun and slightly better than 28A. And again, every woman and the woman didn't make any difference for these native speakers. So same thing for 29 and 30. So going to page 6, the result. All our informants allowed the de dicto reading, which is there is no specific woman John wants to marry. Sorry, it still says de re reading, but I meant de dicto reading. There is no specific woman in both 27A and 27B, and they allow the bound variable readings in 28 through 30, regardless of the resumptive pronoun position, whether it's a subject or object, to the extent that object resumptive pronouns are possible. And this was kind of surprising given Chaoan cells. So it seems that subject and object resumptive pronouns are both not intrusive contra Chaoan cells, and we couldn't find any evidence that subject and object resumptive pronouns are different in nature. So it would have been nice if there was a correlation between the acceptability of a resumptive pronoun and its interpretive possibility, but there isn't. So we need to look for other potential sources of the subject and object asymmetry. One difference between a subject and an object is that subject traces inside an island violate the so-called ECP due to the lack of lexical government. The 33 shows the traditional ECP formulation. An empty category must be either antecedent governed or a head governed by a lexical head. Under this definition, because subject is not lexically governed, it necessarily violates the ECP inside an island, and this may be related to the subject and object asymmetry. So hypothesis 2 said that subject resumptive pronouns ameliorate violations because subject traces lack the lexical government by a verb and thus violate the ECP or an equivalent of it in another term, because reviewers usually don't like it whenever we say the ECP because this term is abundant in the recent minimalist program. But it is true that subject traces inside an island violate something more than a mere island violation, and it may be related to this subject and object asymmetry in resumptive pronouns that all this hypothesis says. And the background assumption behind it is that resumptive pronouns are more appropriately employed when the violations are severe enough. So it's like the mere island violation is not enough. It has to violate the ECP also to for us to employ the resumptive strategy or something like that. And I'll go back to this notion later. And another difference between a subject and an object is that subject make islands unlike object. So there are subject island effects as shown in 36A, but there is no such thing as the object island effect. So this may make the difference. Interestingly, Brooks claims that resumption is actually stranding. So under his analysis, resumptive pronouns are stranded portions of the moved phrase as shown in 37. Some of the argument for this stranding analysis involve the following, as noted in 38. First, there are intermediate resumptive pronouns in languages such as Hebrew, as shown in 39. The man that I think that you said that Sarah wrote poem about him. And this redemptive pronoun about him can show up in the intermediate position, and that's an argument for a resumption, stranding analysis. And second, books claim that lack of adverbial resumptive pronouns, such as thy, which corresponds to y, shows that the D projection is crucial in a resumption, so supporting the structure in 37. And third, he claims that D-linked WH phrases involve stranding configuration as shown in 38C, and the environments that allow resumptive pronouns overlap those where D-linked WH phrases can show up, so it supports the analysis of resumption as stranding as well. And under this analysis, what we thought are subject traces are actually movement of a part of the subject. So the subject resumptive pronoun configuration may be a subject island violation because it is extraction from islands. And this is hypothesis 3. Subject resumptive pronouns ameliorate violation because subject resumptive pronoun configurations violate subject island in addition to the original island. And in this case, again, what we called subject traces violate something that an object trace doesn't. And resumption is employed in only in this case where the violations are severe enough. And our prediction is that if hypothesis 2 is on the right track, that is, if the lexical government is a crucial factor for the amelioration effect, extraction out of a subject, such as the one in 42, should behave the same way as object extraction. So look at 42. That is a priest that Samantha discovered where rumors about him came from. And this is an extraction of an object, him, from inside the subject, rumors about him. So this trace or him is lexically governed by the preposition about. So under the hypothesis 2, this should behave the same way as the object resumption. And if hypothesis 3 is on the right track, that is, if the extraction out of the subject is a crucial factor, this example 42 should behave the same way as subject extraction because it involves a subject island violation on top of a normal WH island violation. So 5.1 shows the result of our preliminary experiment. We conducted a 7-point scale acceptability judgment study to see whether the resumptive pronoun in sentences like 42 exhibits amelioration effect. Participants were 27 native speakers of English, and we made a 9-sentence set with 4 conditions illustrated in 45. And these items were distributed across 4 lists and counterbalanced in such a way that only one version of a sentence set is presented. So 4 conditions are illustrated in 45. Extraction out of a subject condition with a gap is 45A, that the priest that Samantha discovered where rumors about came from. And extraction out of a subject with a resumptive pronoun, that is a priest that Samantha discovered where rumors about him came from. And third, the extraction of the subject itself with a gap, that is a priest that Samantha discovered where came from. And finally, the extraction of a subject with a resumptive pronouns, that is a priest that Samantha discovered where he came from. And in these examples, relative causes instead of WH movement is employed, just because asking for the acceptability of a declarative sentence may be more natural to the participant. And again, the gender bias is controlled. So the head NP is gender bias For example, please is a male biased noun, and the other NPs are biased to the opposite gender, so we used female biased nouns or female proper names. So this facilitates the co-reference reading between the priest and he. So our prediction is repeated in 47, and at hypothesis 2, only 45D should show the repair effect. Only 45, yes, only 45D, but D, but not 45B should show the repair effect, because in 45B, him is lexically governed by about, and it should show the same result as the object version. So only 45D. And under the hypothesis 3, both 45B and D should show the repair effect, because both involve movement out of an island. In figure 2, show the result. Amelioration effect by resumptive pronouns were observed both in extraction of subject and sub-extraction out of subject. And in pairwise comparisons, the resumptive versions were significantly higher than the gap version for both sub-extraction and the extraction of subject conditions, as shown in figure 2. So if you add this new result to the summary table, it will be like in table 2. So we've tested extraction of an object from inside a subject island, and we observed an amelioration effect. So we conclude that lexical government probably is not a crucial factor for the use of the resumptive strategy. And we'd like to add that under the resumptive as stranding analysis, subject resumptive pronoun is also an instance of extraction out of a subject, and that can be the crucial factor. And note that unlike subject island violations, resumptive pronouns cannot ameliorate adjunct islands. That's what Heaston et al. Showed. Sorry, we don't have an example here. But if only subject island violations are repaired by resumption, the two island types cannot be subsumed under the CED effect. So if it's not the CED, maybe under the VP internal subject hypothesis, the freezing effect of the subject island may be the crucial factor. However, the one thing we really should have done is to test whether any kind of sub-extraction behaves in the same way as subject traces. So we really should have done the object subtraction cases as well, as shown in 50B. That's the place that Samantha discovered where she heard the rumors about versus rumors about him. So if resumption is good in this case, the subject island isn't a crucial factor. So it's not the subject and object asymmetry, but it's simple object trace versus everything else. So we need to consider this possibility for the future work. And experiment 2 is a report of not yet successful experiments, so I was going to skip this, but we wanted to see if that trace effect is also repairable by resumption. And we don't have a clear result yet, and we're not sure if we should do it because we are inclined to say that subject island rather than the ECP itself is crucial factor. So even if something like the ECP is relevant for that trace effect, this might not be relevant for resumption. So I'll skip this part. So to conclude that we show the following that listed in 59, and I'll skip this part too because I don't have enough time. And one remaining problem is why is it that resumption doesn't repair a mere island violation? It has to be subject island violation on top of a normal island violation for the subject trace to be replaced with a resumptive pronoun and show the amelioration effect. So why should the informal assumption in 34 and 40 hold? And Omaki and Nakao in preparation is trying to argue that resumptive strategy is costly and it's not worth using when the violation is not severe enough. And we are trying to explore this idea in the future research. Thank you.
So, any questions?
I'd like to suggest two further things you might want to consider doing. The first one has to do with the that trace effect that you didn't discuss.
Yes.
So there's that effect that that trace effect can be that trace effect itself can be ameliorated if there's additional material there, like an adjunct after that, like according to Frank.
I see. That and
that
adjunct
to Frank,
inserted. Yes.
Gap, and that's supposed to ameliorate that trace effect.
Mm-hmm.
And if the appearance of subject resumptives is linked to the that trace effect, then subject resumptives should be more like object resumptives with an intermediate adjunct. And so that might be another way of testing that,
I see.
different way from the one that you have. The other experiment that you might want to consider is if you extract from a subject, from a complex subject, rather than this type of the rumors about something, if you have a clausal subject, if your hypothesis is right, then with a clausal subject, the subject and object resumptives should all of a sudden behave the same. Right? That would be very strong confirmation for your claim. If you had the priest, that is the priest that Samantha discovered where the claim that she will marry him came from, and the claim that he will marry her came from. If all of a sudden those behave the same way, that would be very strong confirmation that this is really about extraction from subjects.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we definitely need to try that too. And yeah, what you said would be our prediction too. Thank you.
I'd like to come back to the comparison between Hebrew and English. So the examples from 22 to 30, actually. Because I got lost with the dedicto and dere readings, because what I thought is that what you're losing is the dedicto reading, right, and not the dere reading. So I was surprised when you said that all your informants allowed the dere reading.
Yes.
So
sorry, that was a mistake too. I kept saying the allowed dere reading, but the allowed dedicto reading.
So that was the
well.
dedicto reading that you
Yes.
get all the time.
I should have emphasized they did allow the dedicto reading, unlike the Hebrew example.
Okay, and I got a similar clarification question related to viable binding as well, because what 24b and 24c show is not that the resumptive can be bound, right, by every man. It seems to suggest that in one case you can reconstruct the restriction in the resumptive place, let's say. It's not that resumptive is bound in. So compared to the examples with English, it's not the same. So in one case you've got the himself that could be reconstructed and be interpreted as a bound viable, and it's not the same with which of the linguists where you're having the kind of example that you had before with the current cells.
Yeah, we should have constructed the exactly parallel examples as well. And
just to check that it is different from Hebrew, because there we're not really sure in the end.
Yeah, we made it similar to Chawan Saodi's example, but it's not parallel with this Hebrew example. So we should have tested this too.
And another last quick question was related to the judgment with 5b actually. Because I was just wondering if that's the girl that I wonder when you met. Because if I remember well, I think that McDaniel and Coward just said that it's not so bad. The judgment is a question mark, if I remember well. So I was just wondering.
Yes.
Well, from the version
true.
I have.
Yeah. Although that I put both traces, a star in 5A and 5B, that's true that subject traces were even lower than the object trace in the first place. But it's definitely not like the ceiling effect. The object trace is not very bad in the first place. That's why we didn't see the resumption. They actually reject this possibility, comparing the sentences to other fillers, which were much better.
There was another question over there, right?
Yeah, with respect to the experiment 2 in progress and the theoretical ideas behind it, Merchant had actually claimed and argued that that trace effect is representational. And in that respect, he was following a long tradition, because Perlmutter 71 had made exactly that argument. And the argument was that violations can be repaired. Neither Perlmutter nor Merchant was talking about resumptive pronouns, though they were talking about sluicing. And it was a very interesting argument. The first argument after Ross's, that the repair phenomenon, and the first place where that kind of repair phenomenon was used to distinguish between derivational constraints and representational constraints.
Yes. So, yeah, Merchant argued that that trace effect can be repaired, and we wanted to show the same result, but we don't have enough.
Most of Merchant's examples weren't so clear, because certainly according to his theory, you couldn't tell whether there was a that in the ellipsocite or not, because his theory in his book just required a semantic parallelism. But Perlmutter actually controlled for that, because he assimilated that trace effect to comp trace effects in general. So, for example, 4-2 kind of examples, and there it's easy to show that the 4 has to be there, and that's exactly what he did. He said in such a construction, the 4 has to be there, and if you extract, the sentence is bad with or without the 4, but if you do sluicing, it becomes good.
And in our cases, the conditions in 57 either does or doesn't have the that, so that's controlled for, so we don't have to replace it with if, although we could. Oh, thank you for the comment.
So, any more questions? Short one? No? That's all. So, thank you very much.
Thank you.